やめてください。とても嫌な感じです。ケイタさんにお会いしなくてはならないんです。
Exactly as Mikia does. In the moment, I would have begged her not to do it, but the moment she did it, I'd probably give her a high five.
答え言ったろ。俺とお前は似た者同士だって。私泣いてしまいそうで。泣いていいですか。先輩、私。
Pain lingers. I get this weird pit in my stomach when I cry, which is only more prevalent if someone's around me. I feel an insurmountable sense of guilt for not being able to control my emotions when I get like that, which usually only ends in me whining harder for being such a weak person. Tangentially related, a few weeks ago I laid in my lover's arms a shaky, sobbing mess. I was a tad intoxicated at the time, and while I'm usually fine with that sort of thing, it weakened my ability to deal with the intrusive thoughts that wouldn't stop pouring in. To spare the specifics, I was a wreck for about an hour and just kept sinking deeper into that mental spiral I've brought up in the past couple videos. The real world subsided into one of irrational sentiments. In the moments I could recognize where I actually was, it reminded me of a similar time when I was in my mother's room years back, which in and of itself was linked to a particularly intense event that had happened in the weeks prior. A moment that had etched itself to scratchy vinyl, playing back without pause over and over. It happened back then, and it was happening again. It's weird to disassociate. No part of you is there except for the emotions, those visceral, unkind emotions that have no care in the world for your crumbling mental state. I'm stuck in my mind while all my body does is panic and fear of where my brain is. It's hard to get out of that state unless you have someone there to bring you down from it, an anchor to ground you back to reality. Thankfully, I did have someone there with me at the time, love her for that, and I was able to eventually calm down and profusely apologize for ruining the mood of the night. She said it was fine, and though it literally was from an outside perspective, I still can't see it as such. I was with the one I loved, and the night was going wonderfully. I should have been happy by all accounts. But I was so far from such that I wouldn't even put the feelings in the same strata. There's nothing rational about that state. Those thoughts, emotions, and utter self-deprecation can strike whenever it wants. Every time I think I've finally overcome that trauma, it plays back in my head at just the wrong time, and I enter that same frantic state where I can't even conceive of myself as a real human being. Most of the time, I don't have anyone there and I get stuck. I've spent hours in that headspace recently. It's the same song and dance until my mind tells me I'm stupid for feeling like that and to just get over it. Similar brain chicanery leads me to not calling anyone either. I tell myself emotions are fleeting and you'll be back to normal soon, which is a bad, extremely unhealthy habit. One that leads to me entering a null state where I stare up at the ceiling, just existing. Thankfully, as I lean more into accepting those emotions as a part of myself, that preclusion towards self-destruction has started to fade, though I'm not certain it'll ever be something I can erase completely. Like with the pivotal moment that a good bit of this all stems from, I just have to learn to live with the demons and try my damnedest to not let them win. Opening the video with all this isn't to drum up sympathy. I don't want pity. This all serves a purpose towards the point I want to get across. No matter how much one is self-actualized, where their life is at, or who they're with, pain lingers. The clip I opened this with, as opposed to the past two videos, and probably the rest, is a bit from the artist formerly known as Digibro's 8 Nights of Kara no Kyoukai series. Now, regardless of your opinions on Trixie, God knows I certainly have a few, I find the video on the third movie particularly intriguing because of its focus on morality. As she said, in the moment I'd beg her not to do it, but after she did I'd probably give her a high five. Each video in the series raises interesting points like that, and I rewatched it all to make sure I'm not just repeating things that have already been said on this hell site. A link will be in the description if you're interested, though they are by all means not integral to this video series that I'm making. Out of everything in B's vids though, that line about Fujino's the one I remember most. Well, that and Sukaku-Zanryu is a film of outrage. Shout out to all and none of you who understood that reference at the end of the last part. To loop back to the point, the fixation on right and wrong within B's video got me thinking about where my stance on Fujino's actions lie. And honestly, when I first watched this movie back in my Hikikomori days, I largely agreed with Digi and Mikia. I would have begged her not to do it, but conversely would feel nothing for the men she killed after the fact. A stance I'm pretty sure is the common consensus, as it's literally just common sense. However, as I grew as a person and omoried my way into remembering some real funny events, my stance has changed a bit. I honestly don't think I'd have the heart to tell her to stop. If anything, I'd struggle not to neg her on. I think it's childish to hold such idealistic views about all of this. For one, Mikia's views, though nice in theory, ultimately accomplish little. Put a pin in that. There is a little something, but he ultimately accomplishes nothing himself, as he spends most of the film running around like a chicken with its head chopped off looking for Fujino. He can't put a stop to her actions, and Shiki is right. If he keeps pressing his luck, he could very easily die. For two, what Fujino does in killing all of her assaulters, though gruesome, is ultimately readily accepted by most people who don't sympathize with one of the aforementioned rapists, which I don't think I have to say is the vast minority of people, I'd hope. Lol. However, lest I get ahead of myself, it could be argued that if these rapists dedicate their lives to doing good after everything, can you really justify the stance of not stopping Fujino? To which I still think the answer is yes. My stance largely aligns with Shiki's in that until the point it reaches indiscriminate slaughter of the innocents, and/or Fujino takes joy in killing, I find a lack of any reason to be angered with her. These people are repugnant, and though they might have gone on to do good things, unless it's something completely earth-shattering, the cost-benefit says that they're better off twisted into pulp. They deserve what Fujino does to them, from both an outsider's standpoint and of course her own. The feeling of pain welling up within her may never truly subside, and though it might sound contradictory to the point I'm trying to make, holding grudges never helps anyone, but her actions of lashing out in this film aren't counterproductive to her getting over it. This is gonna get weirdly esoteric, but bear with me for a bit. I despise the notion that someone who kills a killer is somehow morally dubious. It rings the same tune as forgiveness will lead to salvation. There are some acts that, no matter what happens, can't be forgiven by the victim. Like, say someone spills your fucking milk, yeah, you can forgive them for that, but rape dehumanizes the person being assaulted. It deprives them of their urgency and puts them in an endless mental battle against themselves. It's something, like murder, you can't really undo, and the memories will follow them to their grave. To loop back around to Fujino, and by extension this whole discussion, knowing that the person who assaulted you and made you feel lower than the worms in the fucking dirt is out and about and living a normal life is, and always will be, a subject of contention within the assaulted. A point that springs up at the mention of where the person lives or works, or just as a realization the mind conjures up to be mean. Let me tell you all a short, sleepy time tale from middle school, and strap your seatbelts in. This one's fun. To set the stage, I had fully repressed everything, but every now and again I had moments of lucidity where I would recall what had happened. It was in my 6th grade math class, and I was reading one of those dumb-as-a-brick questions about some guy with 40 bottles of dish soap or something likened to that. I solved the problem quickly enough. This was before they added in the alphabet, so I was still semi-decent at math, but something looked off about the question. So I read it again, and again, until I realized that I had skipped over the name on the 3rd or so read-through. Immediately after reading it though, my mind started peeling back the thin layer of masking tape I had stretched over that part of my psyche. It was just a name, but I broke out in cold sweats. It was just a name, but I grabbed myself to stop the shaking. It was just a simple name, and my eyes averted everyone's gaze as I looked down at the ground to not call attention to myself. I struggled to find mental footing as my brain hazily recalled the various details for me to beat back down into repression. Pain lingers. Even via copious amounts of coping mechanisms, it will always remain. In theme with this little ideology, the title of this film being Remaining Sense of Pain serves a double meaning. One, it has the overt meaning of Fujino's pain intolerance and how she recalls the sensation throughout the movie, though most of that is appendicitis, but two, it hones in on how this is something she'll never truly recover from, emotionally I mean. The two sides of pain, physical and emotional. This whole series has really good titles that, though they sound chuny as hell when translated to English, I can't help but adore. Remaining Sense of Pain serving this function with its title, as well as just how cool it sounds in both English and Japanese, you know I'm right, makes it by far the best. Just in general, like, the titles that come up and compare to Zukaku Zanryu, It's My Own Invention, Subihibi. Yeah, Zukaku Zanryu, It's My Own Invention, title pending, top 3. I'll think of a third later. If I don't, I'll just put like title pending in big large fucking text on the screen. Speaking of Zukaku Zanryu, the series raises an interesting point in this film. A point that was touched on a bit in Satsujin Kozatsu, but comes to the forefront here because of Fujino's actions. Someone can only kill a human once before losing their humanity themselves. What Fujino does is left up to the viewer to decide if it was the correct thing to do or not. As with Fujo's suicide in the first movie, K&K doesn't tell its audience what to feel, but it does state one thing perfectly clear with no room for misinterpretation. No one views the people Fujino kills as humans. The closest a member of the cast ever comes to doing so is when Mikia helps Keita. But that's out of his moral belief to help those in need, and he does it begrudgingly. Toko and Shiki then accost the fuck out of his actions when they find out, to which he can't do anything but acknowledge that they're both correct for doing so. The one time these people are viewed in a helpless light, the main cast moans and begrudges the person who helped them. There's a clear bias against these people, and though it's warranted, the way they're treated by both the actual characters and the film does dabble into a nice little gray area. You can't feel bad for Keita and his friends considering their actions, and though their death scenes might make one cringe, it's out of imagining what it would feel like and nothing else. Still, that cringe factor is pretty high, and seeing them squirm and beg for their lives to be met with malices activates the part of the brain that evokes at least a shred of empathy. Looking at it removed from those initial gut reactions though, as those emotions are typically the most irrational, these scenes take on a new light. They're violent and terrifying. They're oddly beautiful in a way, and hear me out on this. Their beauty is the ugly kind, and can be found in how it parallels the opening scene of Fujino being raped. These men deprived Fujino of her humanity, and now she's doing the same to them. The scenes are all accentuated with horrifying music and the same camera techniques used during the opening scene that let you see just enough to get a grasp of how utterly inhuman and cold it all is. It's that way that Zukaku Zanryu creates that little gray area I brought up earlier. Just talking about it makes it easy to say that Fujino is in the right, but actually seeing what she does to these men and how she renders them in pieces makes it uncertain. It's because of that moral ambiguity that the film offers various different outlooks. For instance, Toko looks at it with indifference, Shiki with a little empathy, and I've already talked about Mikia. No clear answer is objectively stated to be the best, and hell, you don't even have to have a conclusion shown in the work. Kar no Kyoukai doesn't talk down to its viewers. It wants and requires them to think about these things to an almost uncomfortable level to get any kind of enjoyment out of it. And I love this series for it. The writing, specifically in the early half, can be a tinge headache-inducing with how #deep it attempts to be at times, but that's undoubtedly due to Nasu working out the kinks of his writing style. K&K was essentially one of the first things he worked on, for an audience at least, and it's gonna show its age in parts. A growth process every artist experiences. I mean, hell, if you go back to the earlier videos on this channel, the uptick in quality is palpable, I think. It's the same way someone starts out drawing stick figures and can end up drawing the Sistine Chapel. That early level of proficiency in mind, I find it amazing that Sukaku Zanryu works as well as it does. It's certainly far from perfect, but there was a clear passion behind this one, and this is where I think Nasu hit his stride with writing. I say far from perfect because while I do love this story, it's clearly too all over the place for most viewers. Can't tell you how many "explain what was happening please" comments I've seen regarding it. Furthermore, the reasoning for Fujino's pain intolerance is explained in a monologue, her motivations can appear odd, and the film's most upbeat parts are tinged with melancholy. There's not really a reprieve, and it's thus that it can be draining to watch. Though, if I'm being honest, those are all things I love about it, which I will get to in due time, no worries. On the subject of Nasu's works, though, in each of his big three works, Kara no Kyoukai, Tsukihime, and Fate Stay Night, one of the characters from each respectively is the subject of sexual abuse. Of course, the success of how each character is handled is going to vary from person to person, but I think Nasu typically handles the topic well. I'm of the persuasion that art shouldn't have any limits with regards to touchy subjects, and furthermore, showing them on screen in all of their grotesque nature isn't inherently bad taste either. It's all up to what the work is trying to get across that determines how necessary said components are. In the case of Kara no Kyoukai, Fujino's assault is clearly something vile, which is shown in the dismal lighting, scattered framing, and lack of any music. It's deeply uncomfortable, and not in the stock sense of rape is inherently such a thing, everything just feels lifeless. Fitting, considering Fujino's disposition. Being the center of the scene and having this forced upon her, she's barely reacting whatsoever. The answer might be that she's drugged, but there's no real indicator of such. Her pupils aren't dilated, and she is fully cognitively there to recognize what's happening. And she's still disconnected somehow. Either she's had this done to her an uncountable number of times, or she's an interesting person in the same vein as Shiki Ryogi. Both of which turn out to be true. Asagami Fujino is a peculiar character. She's by far my favorite in this series of films, and though a part of that, as you might expect, is because I can relate to her feelings of lashing out on some fundamental level, it's also, conversely, because of the huge disconnect I feel when I see her. Pain and sensitivity. It's a fun concept to think about. Everyone who's viewing this video has probably been told a million times not to put their hands on a hot stove or put their finger in an electrical socket because it'll hurt. Of course, as a kid, you don't know what that means, so like a young, precarious sleepy, you might do both these things just to get a rush, only to find that, yeah, it kinda stings. Same goes with things like hammering a nail in or using a knife. You want to be careful because otherwise you'll spend the rest of the day coping. However, when you're in pain, especially and hopefully at that age, you have someone there to console you and help you get better. I know most of the attention I got as a kid was because I did things like break an arm playing tag or skinned my knee running out the front door. There's a bittersweetness to it all. On one hand, pain helps you learn not to do those actions again lest it be absolutely necessary and with precaution. As well, pain usually means unbridled kindness from others. Inversely, it can ache for hours. And on the mental side of things, sometimes years afterwards. In line with this side, if you don't have anyone there with you, dealing with pain alone is isolating to a numbing degree. Humans form a lot of their actions and ideologies around this sensation. It's instilled in a lot of us from birth to do so. So what happens to someone who doesn't have that? There's a flashback scene in Zukaku Zanryu that shows a young Fujino cutting up some kind of pretend food with an actual knife. She's covered in her own blood because she slipped up a few times, but due to her pain and sensitivity, she isn't fazed by it at all. Until her mother comes in, she continues slicing merrily. It's all to be expected, and this scene would have been fine ending there. After all, Fujino's condition is displayed clearly, and that sets the precedent for why she is the way she is as we see her. But this story aims to go above the bare minimum. The scene continuing into Fujino bursting into tears at being embraced despite not knowing why she's being embraced is the most well-executed bit of this little section. Fujino may not feel pain, but she does know that being cared for still feels really, really nice. The reaction is indicative of Fujino not really being loved much as she was growing up. Not intentionally by the parents, mind you, just by happenstance. After all, when do you show the most compassion for someone? When they're in pain. Unless the wound is obvious, like Fujino's cut-up hands, it's gotta be hard to notice if someone never reacts to it. While she probably had a fine enough upbringing, Fujino likely had a scant amount of times where she was held after falling down or twisting her wrist. It's an experience, as far as we know, that only happened twice. Once here and again with Mikia. In both, she doesn't necessarily get it, but she does let her confused emotions out and acknowledge that it feels really good. Like, there's just nothing quite like being held or being cared for, you know? It's a nice sensation. It's why mommy fetishes are a thing. All you fucking strangers. Ah, God. Fujino MILF. Inimaginable. Lol. She knows that pain is a bad thing due to being cared for like that during times she should be in it. Yet there's still a disconnect between her and other people. A disconnect that is literally shown in the sports festival flashback before Mikia shows up. She's with a group of friends and interacting with them, but look where she is. Life as a normal person is something she can emulate, but the true experience, it's just out of reach. Fujino can't be on the same level of emotion because a lot of emotions are informed by pain, getting angry at stubbing a toe, sad at falling on your face, or happy at avoiding a painful situation. All things that make someone more expressive. It's why she barely emotes in the flashbacks. She doesn't have anything to inform those emotions, so the best she can do is copy what she sees, which you can see her struggling to do when her friends ask her why she's lagging behind. Her face looks more distressed from not reacting properly than it is strained from a twisted ankle. It's a nice little bit of framing. It isolates Fujino and puts into perspective why Mikia showing up, giving her a piggyback ride, and telling her it's okay to cry had such an effect on her. When Mikia picks her up and makes her feel genuine emotions and starts walking along, she can catch up to people more. She can get that genuine human connection, and she's on the same level. She just needed a little help to get there. It's beautiful. It's mwah. It perfectly establishes why she fucking has a crush on him. It's not just fucking gay plot bullshit because everyone has to have a crush on the MC because Nasu only knows how to write fucking visual novel protagonist. I mean, that's definitely part of it, but there's setup for it, you know. It's alright setup. It's similar in function to what her mother did and plants the idea in Fujino's mind that being in pain is desirable in some small way if it means feeling that warmth. It's tougher for her, but she can still make those human connections. There's a small, indefinite sting she feels from not being able to react or be comforted like everyone else is when they're hurt, but that fades a bit when people still care for her regardless, which is clearly a rare thing for Fujino, hence why she cries. Oh my god, it's just like the fucking OST says, Fujino's track is If I Cry. Oh, it's so deep. Oh, there's your soundtrack tangent for this episode. Isn't it so good? Isn't it so wonderful? Isn't it fucking great? I hate myself right now. I hate that I went into this with this mentality and this is the best I've ever recorded a fucking script. Even when she's insensitive to it, pain lingers. Still though, for a large part, she is just emulating. For example, while she's being sexually assaulted, she recognizes that it should be an uncomfortable and pain-inducing experience, so she tells them to stop, but there's no emotion in her words. Pain induces things like shock and anger in people, but as someone who's never felt it, she doesn't know how to express it beyond basic phrases. Her words are cold, as are her movements. As Keita said, it was like fucking a doll. The assault isn't the impetus for Fujino's rampage. No, that comes when they hit her in the back with a baseball bat to make her feel something. To which her insensitivity to pain is temporarily cured, and oh, she definitely does do something. Fujino feeling that sensation for the first time is intoxicating as it is, well, painful. After not feeling it for pretty much her entire life, it creates a frenzy within her, and she lashes out on anyone in sight, literally in sight. Fujino's Mystic Eyes of Distortion, in addition to having a way better aesthetic than the Mystic Eyes of Death Perception, were suppressed at around birth or a bit later. The specifics aren't important. What is important is that it's what caused her intolerance to pain in the first place. Now that she feels it, she also has those back. It's so much more visceral in function, and it's a concept that reaches its full potential from the first moments it's seen. For clarification, I do think that the Mystic Eyes of Death Perception are cool as well. Let's just say when it comes to Shiki's, Tono is the one that capitalizes. That's for a later date to discuss though. Fujino's beautiful, vibrant eyes are the subject here and now. As I was saying, her hunting down all the rapists could just stem from them being around when she finally felt pain and her wanting to cover up her massacre. Though that might be what the film outright states, I find that reasoning is incredibly surface level and, well, rather shit. Here's what I find the more interesting, read better, interpretation. Fujino, upon feeling pain for the first time while being raped, indirectly realized what it was these men were actually doing to her. It all clicks, and it overwhelms the fuck out of her. The stain of every single time they assaulted her all comes barreling in at once, and she snaps completely. The cliche of the long hot shower after being assaulted only comes into play after this happens, so I think that was the intention. To show that it's only now that Fujino really gets it. Also, the whole was she stabbed, no not actually plot thread, though kind of stupid in execution, like, I think this is one of the weakest points in the movie. Like, how you're gonna show her clothes with a hole mark where a knife was, but oh no, she wasn't actually stabbed, it's just appendicitis. It's a stupid plot point, and I dislike it greatly. Like, where else did that whole... back to the point. It ties into that whole concept by making Fujino have an always present reminder of what they did to her. It may not have been from actually being stabbed, but that pain refuses to leave, and that, in tandem with her now present emotional trauma, results in a Fujino that is barely identifiable to the one seen before. The more she ruminates on everything, the worse she feels, and the more she wants them all dead, no matter the cost. Her decline is a gradual one, and I appreciate that it isn't instant. This is all clearly something Fujino tried to move on from, but just couldn't forget about. She started on one end of the emotion spectrum, being distant and reserved, but winds up on the polar opposite side by the end of the film, letting her emotions take the forefront. It's a complete and utter mental breakdown, and seeing it translated so perfectly to screen is kinda cathartic in a way. I hope that's not just me. Fujino is usually rational and an in-the-moment person. She uses her right brain to estimate how she should react in certain situations, and as shown, that has netted her a good school and friends. Here, though, she depends entirely on her left brain, and all the negative aspects of that reliance. Fujino, past this point, is typically seen walking around in a daze, disconnected from reality save for the sentiment of murder ringing about her skull. She's going to inflict all the stored-up pain she feels back, no matter their consent. It's like rape, but murder, you get it? pretty forced metaphor. I promise I'm not just saying this because I happen to agree with her ideology the most, but Shiki is right about everything. Taking the last film into account, she knows that murder is a slippery slope, and Fujino's really close to sliding. That's why Shiki encounters Fujino 2 times in the movie before they actually fight. Fujino hasn't tumbled into being a delusional murderer yet, but the moment she does, Shiki will be there to kill her. Shiki, being an actualized person now, recognizes where Fujino is. Kinda. Shiki killed her own will in the same way Fujino kills her assaulters to make things easier on themselves. Both were shells of people with an interest in the macabre. Both have mystic eyes. Both have an impulse for destruction. In Shiki's view, until the threshold for slaughter is reached, she can't judge Fujino's actions. It'd be hypocritical for her to. Where Shiki didn't cross the line is in choosing not to kill Mikia, who was an innocent person. When Fujino does go that extra step, Shiki, who had been stagnant the whole movie, gains every right to judge Fujino's actions and go in for the kill. She can empathize with her. She can never be close to Fujino because Shiki sees parts of herself that she hates in her, but she does feel for her. Which all culminates in the bridge scene. Oh, the bridge scene. Shiki doesn't kill Fujino with her eyes here, more so her words. After killing one innocent person, Fujino is on the precipice of becoming the very thing she set out to kill, a monster who takes the utmost pleasure in depriving people of their humanity. A precipice she's heavily leaning towards one side of. Shiki points out her smile in the midst of them trying to kill each other, and Fujino is surprised at the revelation about herself. She's so far gone that she's taking joy in trying to kill someone. Acknowledging that gives her a brief bit of lucidity from her mental breakdown, during which she realizes what exactly she's been doing the entire time. She might not be morally reprehensible for the rapist she killed, but she is for the one innocent person she slaughtered. Nothing can change that. It's an act she can't really take back, and though it can be argued it was in the heat of the moment, that doesn't alter reality. Having just felt pain for the first time recently and having a violent mental collapse that resulted in crime scenes so gruesome, the question of who is the real victim becomes dubious. Fujino was already in a very precarious mental state. Throw in the bitter pill of re-illusion into reality and the fact that she was getting off to all this, and everything just starts to break, twist, mend, call it what you will, the end result is all the same. The final gasp of a struggling existence that shreds its vocal cords and crying out, hoping for the comfort she had been afforded a few times before. But no one's here for her this time. She's just left with her accuser and cruel, unkind thoughts and emotions. Which of course results in pain lingers. After everything is said and done and Fujino has gotten her revenge, it still hasn't faded. If anything, it's only gotten more potent. When Shiki finds her amid the rebel, she takes Mikia's words into account, which is that little thing he did accomplish in the story, remember I brought that up earlier, and does something we haven't seen her do yet. An action that's a tad unexpected given her earlier conviction. She reaches out to Fujino and tells her that it's okay to cry if she's in pain. The film shows Mikia fade into Shiki as that phrase is said, showing that though other people can be cold, they can also be warm and accepting, in places you wouldn't expect, and people you wouldn't expect. To which Fujino, now also comprehending the full meaning of those words, starts crying her eyes out. For the person she killed, for how her life is going to change, for her broken body, for being reminded of a pleasant memory, for still being alive, for herself. Bittersweet tears are the hardest to get out. They feel almost irresponsible because they're conflicted by their very nature. Fujino cried because of various depressing and happy reasons. All those feelings were odd to her, so she held it in as long as she could. The entire second half of this movie, after she can feel pain, where she displayed a wide variety of emotions, not once did she cry. They'd be bittersweet tears if she did, and though she had been told in her past that it was okay and did cry earlier in the movie, she still couldn't allow herself that. Which is something I feel a lot of people can understand. Fuck, at least to me. Let's hop back to that story I brought up earlier about me crying in my girlfriend's arms. I mentioned the pit I felt in my stomach. I was having a breakdown and recalling all this messed up stuff that had happened in my past, which was sad. But above all else, I was just happy to finally, after years of dealing with it by myself, have someone there who consoled me and understood. I felt guilty for taking joy in that, for taking joy in being sad. Is it really right to take pleasure in being sad if it means getting the affection of someone you love? It's a moral dilemma, and the answer I found, informed by Fujino's own tears, is this. Those bittersweet cries are the most important ones to get out because they're the hardest to get out. It's not emotional manipulation to want someone there to comfort you, nor is it weak to need someone. It's human. We all have bad days where things just become unbearable to deal with, so sometimes we lose it a bit. Now, using people as a crutch all the time is bad. It drains the other person and makes them feel like they're never enough. Speaking from experience on that one, that's why I'm big on the whole complementary, not supplementary when it comes to relationships. But two people helping each other out every now and again is a beautiful thing, exceedingly so even, which is a lesson Fujino learns here. Pain lingers. That's okay. She'll have to live with the sin of what she did forever, and that is her compensation, but she's still a person who deserves to live by the end of it all. Kara no Kyokai's own logic is that you can only kill one person before you go into the realm of slaughter. If we factor that the men Fujino distorted into chunks were all monsters who were beyond saving anyhow, then Fujino did only kill one person. A bit of logic that I think was intended because Fujino cries for herself, accepts her indelible sin, and continues to live life. Unlike the scene with Miki at the beginning of the film, she won't have to ask for permission to cry, she just will from here on out. She cries here instead of dying the monster she was moments before. She was on the precipice still, and she chose humanity. Maybe I'm over-explaining this, but what the fuck is analysis but over-explaining it? I don't think an epilogue is needed because there's nowhere for Fujino to go but into that wonderful everyday, one where she can sympathize with others on a deeper level and put actual emotions into her words because of her experiences. One where she'll be an actualized human. Pain lingers, but because of that, Fujino can care for people like others have cared for her. More importantly, she can do the same for herself now. Sukakuzanryu is a film brimming with these negative feelings, and it's only upon rumination that any ray of hope can be seen. The last shot is Fujino being taken away by an ambulance, and that's not exactly hopeful. But she will live, which is inspiring in a sense. Everyone by the end will continue to exist regardless of the pain. It's how you deal with it that codifies you as your own person, which is the journey Fujino took. Character arcs and all that. I love this movie, if you couldn't tell. I was worried that writing the script would send me reeling in a similar fashion to the Maid video. Thankfully, as I started writing, though it was tough at parts, I didn't have nearly as horrible a time. The pain may stick around, linger, if you will, but it's becoming a bit easier. I like to think Fujino has a similar experience. With that, I will conclude the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and share the video around if you enjoyed it. This channel is growing a bit more every day and it's really beautiful to see. All veneer of sarcasm aside, 1K subs. I still need to do a stream for it, but it's still fucking incredible to me. Next milestone will be like 5K or 10K. I'll do something. I'll do something for all these milestones. These videos have been increasingly personal, so I hope it reaches someone other than me. To that one guy in the comments asking for a Shiro vid though, for requests like that and any other like them, I can direct you to my Patreon, where the Sachin tier literally says I will make a video on any topic you want. Just message me your request and I will do my best. Shilling over and sleepy out. Goodbye for now, everyone. Take care.